trouble erupts almost immediately as Venezuelans mobilize to break blockade. Waving banners and chanting anti-government slogans, Venezuela's opposition managed to puncture President Nicolás Maduro's humanitarian aid blockade on Saturday, sending at least one truck across from Brazil. But violence also erupted at the border with Colombia, underscoring the risks Mr. Maduro's adversaries are taking in their campaign against him. A pickup truck of aid crossed into Venezuela from the northern Brazilian town of Pacairama, in what opposition figures said was a small but symbolic puncture of Mr. Maduro's pledge to keep unauthorized assistance out. "We did it," said Maria Teresa Balandria, who is the Brazil envoy of the Venezuelan opposition leader, Juan Guaido. "This is a major victory." Still, as of midday, no sign of any major breaches appeared elsewhere in the blockade. And trouble erupted as a march near a footbridge to Colombia degenerated into running battles between young protesters and security forces. That march, in the Venezuelan border town of Urania, was meant to clear a path for aid to be delivered via a footbridge blocked by Mr. Maduro's forces. Locals defied the government's orders and tried to storm the bridge, but Venezuelan security forces fired tear gas to disperse them, and clashes left a trail of damage and burning vehicles. Protesters in Urania also stormed a school where 100 government militia members, many of them retirees, were staying. Some joined the protesters. Mr. Guaido, the 35-year-old leader of the opposition who claims to be Venezuela's rightful leader, said from the Colombian side of the border that he hoped the Venezuelan security forces would stand aside and allow the aid in. Editor's picks. A pumping conspiracy, why workers smuggled breast pumps into prison. The 20 best TV dramas since The Sopranos. You know the Lorena Bobbitt story. But not all of it. Anyone who is not on the side of the people and who prevents the entry of humanitarian aid is a deserter who betrays our people, Mr. Guaido said in a Twitter post. Those who accompany us to save the lives of Venezuelans are true patriots. Earlier Saturday, Mr. Guaido posted on Twitter that several members of the National Guard assigned to the Simon Bolivar International Bridge that connects Venezuela and Colombia had joined the opposition. He posted a video showing 3 men wearing Venezuelan military police uniforms, escorted by a police officer on the Colombian side of the border. They have decided to stand on the side of the people and the Constitution. He wrote in a message. Welcome. The arrival of freedom and democracy to Venezuela is already unstoppable. In a foretaste of the confrontation over aid, Venezuelan security forces near the Brazil border opened fire on a crowd blocking access to a road on Friday, killing 2 people and injuring a dozen others. As evening fell on Friday, Mr. Maduro's government added 3 bridges along the Colombian border to a growing list of port of entry closures that included the borders with Brazil and 3 Caribbean islands, effectively sealing off most of Venezuela's main entry points by land and sea. As the sun rose on Saturday morning, several hundred Venezuelans had gathered in an empty lot beside the Tienditas bridge here in Cúcuta, under a massive flag hung from a crane. Many slept on open ground in the makeshift camp as opposition activists organized prayer circles and danced to salsa music, calling for the downfall of Mr. Maduro. I know it's been a long night but we are moving ahead, an opposition member, Adolfo Marin, said to the crowd. Remember we have a blockade, but manpower is supernatural. Believe me, with a small group of people we can move these containers with a push and a shove. The soldiers of the lower and middle classes today need humanitarian aid, too, Victor Barboza, an organizer in the camp, said of the security forces waiting on the other side of the bridge. They have a child who eats just 1 meal a day. They have a sister who can't get medication for her illness. Sign up for the interpreter. Subscribe for original insights, commentary and discussions on the major news stories of the week, from columnists Max Fisher and Amanda Taub. Sign up. The border showdown has become one of the most tense and unusual in the region's history. Mr. Guaido has been recognized as Venezuela's interim president by more than 50 countries, including the United States. He has staked his challenge to Mr. Maduro on the promise that he will do what the president refuses to, open the country, which suffers from deadly shortages of food and medicine, to international aid shipments. The White House has waded deep into the standoff, authorizing shipments of aid on military planes and holding a rally at which President Trump warned Venezuela's military to abandon Mr. Maduro or lose everything. In response to the killings on Friday, the White House issued a statement strongly condemning the use of force by Mr. Maduro's government, warning that rights violations will not go unpunished, and urging the military to uphold its constitutional duty to protect the citizens of Venezuela and allow aid to enter the country. Mr. Maduro now claims that the aid containers are part of a plot that will lead to an American invasion. His government erected shipping containers on the Tienditas Bridge to keep the aid out. Before the border closure, Mr. Guaido himself slipped in over the border into Colombia, where he attended a Latin pop music concert in support of the opposition that was sponsored by the British billionaire Richard Branson. Mr. Guaido was greeted like a rock star, with cheers and denunciations of Mr. Maduro. Mr. Guaido was expected to be among those leading the march over the bridge. But it was unclear whether the authorities would allow him into the country or arrest him for defying a travel ban that Mr. Maduro's government had imposed. Some Colombians expressed sympathy with Mr. Guaido's cause and solidarity with those on the other side of the border. "We've come to help Venezuelans," said Claudia Perez, a 38-year-old resident of Cúcuta, which has been hit hard by a wave of Venezuelans fleeing the country. "We on the border have suffered because public services have deteriorated because of overpopulation and growing insecurity." On the Venezuelan side of the border, soldiers interviewed said their morale was low. Many said they were suffering from the same shortages of food as the protesters and said they did not want to fire on them if they stormed the bridge. But the presence of pro-government armed groups known as colectivos raised concern about the possibility of violence. They were beginning to appear on the border by early Friday evening, mingling with other government supporters. Jorge Gil, 50, from the Venezuelan city of Guatire, said he had come to Cúcuta last year after the death of his wife, who had suffered a brain injury and could not find medicine. As he awaited whatever happened next on the bridge, he remembered better times in Venezuela. "My youth was lovely," he said. "I enjoyed it and my children so much. It wasn't that I was rich, but I had good work." More recently, he said, "We ate once, sometimes twice, daily. This after living peacefully with 3 normal meals a day and sometimes a snack or a stew on Sunday. We just had nothing."